20 disturbing internet discoveries, 7 levels. I've collected some of the most disturbing things ever found on the internet into one iceberg. We'll start with some of the more well-known incidents, but the deeper we get, the more disturbing things will become. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. The dismembered horse photos. In late 2011, a series of images appeared on the internet, catching millions of users off guard. But the story behind them was just as horrific and dark. A middle-aged mare, long in declining health, was put out of her misery with a single rifle shot to the head. The couple who owned and cared for the animal split the body open and began removing her entrails, peeling back the horse's sides, exposing rib bones and organ cavities. Then, the woman climbed inside. She literally removed every stitch of clothing she had and sank into the emptied torso until only her head and shoulders peeked out through the gaping hole. Her partner, armed with a camera, began taking photos of her in the cavity, blood coating her skin and hair as she gazed at the camera with a calm expression. Other images showed them together, each holding pieces of muscle or offal, posing as though sampling raw meat. Some shots lingered on the severed limbs, the spinal column half visible beneath hanging flesh. It was an insane, bizarre, and psychopathic thing to do, but then they went further. They uploaded them online. Within hours, the photos went viral, with the internet responding very, very negatively. Users began making threats demanding legal action and appealing to have the images removed. Authorities in Washington County opened an inquiry into possible cruelty charges, but ultimately found that the mare's death was humane under state statute. Her body had been treated with no additional violence beyond the initial shot and subsequent removal of tissue. By year's end, officials closed the file, citing no prosecutable violation. The couple maintained they acted out of a desire to feel at one with the horse, to confront mortality through direct contact. But most people saw that excuse as total bull. For many, they just needlessly decided to have fun in a living thing's final moments. Level 2. Man films tornado rip house apart. On November 17, 2013, weather services across Illinois warned of severe weather, including long-tracked, significant tornadoes. Mark Wells was home with his oldest daughter, Josie, when a massive supercell EF4 thunderstorm began approaching Washington, Illinois, around 11:05 a.m. Mark began filming what he initially thought would be standard storm footage from inside his home. Through his window, the dark funnel cloud appeared against the sky, growing larger and more defined as it moved directly toward their neighborhood. The tornado struck with devastating speed. In the video, Wells can be heard shouting to Josie as the structure begins to shake violently. They rushed to take shelter in the central room of the house. The camera went dark for crucial seconds. Large pieces of debris crashed against the house with thunderous bangs as 190-mile-per-hour winds tore apart everything in their path. When the video resumed after the tornado passed, Wells emerged to find his house completely destroyed. The footage shows him looking through what remained of his home. Debris scattered everywhere, windows blown out, walls collapsed. But the most chilling moment comes when he steps outside and realizes the scope of the destruction. The entire neighborhood was gone. In fact, nearly 5,000 people had been in the tornado's path, and while relatively few were killed due to early warnings and the fact that many were at church or out of town, 125 people were injured, and 3 died. Mark posted the video online with a simple but haunting message. He was grateful his wife Carrie and their other daughters were out of town when the storm hit, and thankful that he and Josie survived without serious injury. Egyptian journalist live death. Egyptian journalist Adel Al-Ghoghari had built a career defending lost causes, but a Wednesday night on Al-Hadath television would prove to be his last stand. Adel sat in the Cairo studio of the Iraqi channel in the middle of an intense debate with Brigadier General Hossam from the Free Syrian Army. Adel's position was clear and uncompromising. He would defend Bashar al-Assad's regime against what he saw as foreign-funded insurgents. Now, this was part of the show. Nakat Sahina, or Hotspots, was literally designed to create heated debates and arguments, just like an American show like The View or any of those news panel shows. Adel had appeared on shows like this before, but tonight was a whole other situation. He furiously called Brigadier General Hassam a fugitive soldier and accused the Free Syrian Army of being funded by Israel. He was getting increasingly angrier, more passionate and furious against this man he openly hated. But then, mid-argument, Adel's voice began to change, his words becoming labored. The camera kept rolling as he appeared to struggle. He was suffering from a blood clot, abruptly ending the debate and prompting a medical emergency live on air. It was a pretty rough finale to years of defending an increasingly indefensible regime. Paramedics rushed Adel to the hospital, but the damage was irreversible. He was pronounced dead on arrival, his final words having been spent defending Assad's government while violently attacking those who opposed it. The footage went viral shortly after his death. Now, our videos also go viral, just under better circumstances, but we do need folks like you to hit that subscribe button so we can keep making more great videos. Thanks. Level 3. Missing child found dead at home. 4-year-old Paulette Jabara Farah was tucked into bed by her mother on March 21, 2010 after returning from a family trip to Valle de Bravo. She lived in a luxury apartment in Huixquilucan, an upscale suburb of Mexico City, with her parents, Mauricio Guevara and Lisette Farah, her 7-year-old sister, and 2 nannies. Paulette had developmental disabilities that left her unable to speak and requiring assistance to walk. The next morning, Nanica Erica Casimiro entered Paulette's bedroom to wake her for school and found an empty bed. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the apartment. The locks remained intact, surveillance cameras showed no one entering or leaving with the child, and the window to her second-floor bedroom remained undisturbed. The family began searching the building immediately, but Paulette had vanished without a trace. The disappearance triggered a massive media campaign that captivated Mexico. Missing person posters appeared across Mexico City, television advertisements pleaded for Paulette's return, and social media campaigns spread nationwide. Attorney General Alberto Vazquez assigned 30 investigators to the case. During the search, Paulette's mother gave televised interviews from her daughter's bedroom, holding Paulette's pajamas and pleading with anyone who had taken her daughter to bring her back. The investigation soon focused intensely on the family after inconsistencies emerged in their statements. Secret recordings captured Lisette telling her older daughter not to speak to the police, leading the mother to become the primary suspect, or, as one officer said, the only suspect. 9 days after the disappearance, investigators returned to reconstruct the events of that night. They were filming their recreation when they detected a faint smell of decomposition coming from Paulette's bedroom. Following the odor, they pulled back the sheets and blankets at the foot of the bed and discovered Paulette's body wedged between the mattress and the wooden bed frame. She had been there the whole time. In the exact room where dozens of investigators had searched, where trained search dogs had sniffed for clues, where television interviews had been conducted, and where family friend Amanda De La Rosa had slept for several nights. The bedroom had been thoroughly compromised during the 9-day search, with hundreds of people walking through, leaving footprints and contaminating potential evidence, making it impossible to identify who did this. The autopsy revealed that Paulette had died of asphyxiation. Forensic experts concluded that she had died shortly after her disappearance, probably on the same night she went missing. The official conclusion stated that Paulette had accidentally moved to the foot of her bed during the night, becoming trapped in the narrow space between the mattress and bed frame, and suffocated. The investigation was closed without criminal charges, but the case destroyed the family. Mauricio and Lisette publicly accused each other of involvement in their daughter's death. Their marriage crumbled under the pressure, leading to divorce and a bitter custody battle over their surviving daughter. The public, however, has never been convinced by the official explanation, with many Mexicans viewing the case as evidence of systemic corruption in their justice system. Active Shooter. Active Shooter was a highly controversial video game that encouraged players to step into a school corridor and take on one of three roles: an armed intruder, a tactical responder, or a bystander attempting escape or defense. Early footage showed hallways, a lot of gunshots, and a running tally of fallen staff and students using a stark counter in the lower corner. The game was so simply designed that it shocked many of those who saw it. Within days of its May 2018 debut on Steam, petitions against it shot right past six figures, fueled by relatives of actual campus tragedies who found the concept unthinkably disgusting. Critics also pointed to the callous timing, with the game releasing just months after a Florida campus crisis left 17 dead and families still rebuilding shattered lives. On May 29th, Valve Corp pulled Active Shooter and ejected its creator and publisher from Steam. The stated reason was not actually the subject matter, but the operator's history of customer mistreatment, copyright swipe, and reviews rigging. Which is odd. They may have well just said it was because of content. Even so, political figures joined the fray. A U.S. senator branded the game inexcusable, and local sheriffs described it as a visceral affront to grieving families, especially given how faithfully the creators rendered the classrooms and lockers. One parent, whose daughter was among 17 killed earlier that year, wrote that nothing in recent memory had felt as exploitative as this game. The game was basically a very cheap cash grab targeting vulnerable minds who may well go on to replicate the game in reality. Despite attempts by its makers to rebrand and shift focus onto the tactical response view, nobody bought it for a second. The game was a cruel, exploitative attempt to make a buck, and the world rejected it overwhelmingly. Ethnic Cleansing. Ethnic Cleansing was released on January 21st, 2002, a crude first-person shooter crafted by National Alliance's multimedia arm, Resistance Records. We'll come back to that in a second. This is not a subtle game. From the second it loads up, players select one of three avatars: a Klansman, a neo-Nazi skinhead, or Aryan White Will. Once you've chosen which loser you're going to play, you're dropped into a facsimile of a dilapidated city that resembles a slum in New York. A pounding white power rock soundtrack underscores every moment as the player navigates street corners and alleyways, hunting stereotyped figures labeled as African Americans, Latinos, and Jews. When these targets fall, black characters emit simulated primate sounds, Latinos cry out, "Ay caramba," or boast about taking a siesta,
I go take my siesta now.
and Jewish figures holler, "Oy vey," before disappearing. You get the idea, it's racist. The game only has 2 levels, but they're short and brutal. In the first, the player cleanses an urban ghetto of subhumans before descending into a subway hideout, where Jewish conspirators lurk. The final boss battle pits the player against a caricature of Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who attacks with a rocket launcher and spouts insults about destroying white culture. Resistance Records chose Martin Luther King Jr. Day for the release, advertising, "Celebrate Martin Luther King Day with a virtual race war."
Is multiculturalism making you sick? Are blacks taking over your town? What you need is ethnic cleansing. Black drug dealers? No problem. Illegal aliens? Forget about it. Crack whores? No more. When you have ethnic cleansing, the game.
You know, just in case you didn't know that this was an intensely racist game. Sean Walker, then chair of National Alliance, openly admitted the aim was to make a racially provocative video game and, if possible, encourage racial separation. Unsurprisingly, entire communities and organizations pushed back against the game, calling it a disgusting, sick perversion of popular software, using open-source engines so hate groups could distribute them to a teenage audience primed by mainstream shooters. But the hate group themselves loved the game, saying that it was effective recruitment material. Unfortunately for them, and maybe fortunately for us, the game was so generally terrible that even neo-Nazis rejected it, meaning it faded as quickly as it came out. It's now remembered only as one of the most overtly racist titles ever released. Level 4. Russian Brick. Olga Gaikovich, an employee of the Syktyvkarian Ministry of Internal Affairs, was beside her husband Vadim in the passenger seat of their Audi A4, headed through the Rostov region with Vadim's brother's family nestled in the back. A Kamaz truck was lumbering ahead, its load of bricks heaped high. But in a freak accident that sounds almost impossible, one of the bricks came loose, shattered the glass in Vadim's car, and hit Olga in the temple. The car suddenly fishtailed as Vadim fought for control. In shocked silence, they pulled over. Olga's skull was split open. Vadim desperately tried to get help as passersby stared in horror, confused by what could possibly have happened. The truck driver pressed on, oblivious to the devastation trailing behind him. Only when police flagged him down some miles later did he stop. Olga was rushed to the Azov hospital, where surgeons fought for 2 hours to save her, but they couldn't. At 29, she was gone. But the police were not convinced this was an accident. The head of the Rostov region's press service said that there would be some kind of investigation into the incident. The driver faced charges of negligence rather than simple fault, despite not even knowing what had happened at the time. Now, there's never been a conclusive answer. Many people came to blame careless load securing practices. Others believe that this was some kind of classic Russian assassination, despite the incredible number of precise coincidences that would have to be achieved to pull that off. But even today, the question of what exactly happened to Olga Gaikovich is as strong as ever. They made their minds up, but what do you think happened? Pixel scandal on Habbo Hotel. In 2012, Channel 4 News began a 2-month undercover investigation on Habbo Hotel, a virtual application where children around the world could interact in custom-built environments. Journalist Rachel Seifert went undercover posing as an 11-year-old girl. But within minutes of logging in, she started to get repeated requests to switch to webcam and private messaging services almost immediately. Those who didn't go private told her to strip and do explicit acts in public spaces in front of everyone who happened to be around. Over those 2 months, Rachel noticed that moderation was slow to respond or just non-existent. Public rooms hosted graphic invitations and role-play brothels set up by adult users seeking to blatantly groom underage players. The moderator should have instantly intervened to put an end to it and protect the children as soon as the conversation started, but that simply never happened. The situation was dangerous, yet nothing was being done about it at all. When the Channel 4 report aired in June 2012, Habbo's owner, Saluke, immediately muted old chat across its global community of over 250 million registered users and 9 million monthly visitors. That was supposed to give enough time for an internal investigation, but it obviously sparked a massive uproar as genuine users were now unable to talk with their friends. Retailers including Tesco and WH Smith pulled Habbo gift cards from their shelves, and 2 major investors, Balderton Capital and private equity firm 3i, resigned board seats and divested stakes valued in the tens of millions. The situation had become so bad that the Salake CEO issued a statement expressing regret, pledging to tighten security and strengthen site rules, including hiring a team of 225 moderators to track some 70 million lines of conversation each day, and promise new technical tools to filter coded or misspelled explicit language. Within weeks, chat functions reopened in stages across several countries, but the brand's reputation was permanently doomed, and it never fully recovered. Habbo became a hotel for Samantha Koenig. On the evening of February 1st, 2012, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig closed her shift at a drive-up coffee kiosk in Anchorage, Alaska. As she counted the day's receipts, an unknown man approached the window with a weapon, ordering her into his pickup. From there, he drove off into the dark. She would never be seen again. Investigators later determined that Samantha was taken to a small outbuilding on the outskirts of town where the perpetrator confined her for nearly 24 hours. He inflicted repeated physical harm, then ended her life and concealed her remains in the frozen waters of Matanuska Lake. But weeks after Samantha's disappearance, her family received a photograph meant to show she was alive and would be returned safely. In reality, the image was taken long after she had died. The perpetrator had actually gone to the trouble of sewing her eyelids open with fishing line in order to capture that photo 2 weeks following her death, and mailed it to Samantha's parents as ransom proof. Convinced the photo was genuine, they deposited the requested funds into an account tied to Samantha's debit card. When cash withdrawals began appearing on surveillance footage, law enforcement traced them from Alaska through several states, ultimately identifying and arresting the suspect. The man in custody, Israel Keys, was a construction contractor who had hidden kill kits across the country for years. After his arrest in March 2012 on unrelated fraud charges, he spoke candidly about multiple victims and even described his methods in detail. Based on his confessions, the FBI dispatched its cold water dive team to Matanuska Lake. Using an underwater robot, divers located Samantha's remains buried beneath the ice. Finally, Samantha was coming home. But justice wouldn't be served. While awaiting trial for Samantha's case, Israel Keys took his own life in his jail cell on December 2nd, 2012, guaranteeing that he would never serve time for his crimes. Kisa Khan. It was midday on December 3rd, 2012, and at the 49th Street subway station, 58-year-old Kisa Khan confronted Naeem Davis, a street vendor who had been cursing at waiting passengers. As the train approached, Naeem pushed Han onto the downtown Q train tracks, leaving him stranded between the platform and the rail. This single photograph captured the moment Han clung to the platform's edge moments before the inevitable happened. The photographer, a freelancer named R. Umar Abbasi, said that he had hoped the repeated flashes of his camera would warn the train driver to stop. But when his images were published on the front page of a tabloid under the headline, "Doomed," it sure didn't seem that he was trying to save an innocent man. If anything, it seemed like he took advantage of the situation and did nothing, then profited from a man's death. Other people on the platform had taken actual action, screaming and waving bags at the train to try and get help. One second-year resident at Beth Israel Medical Center rushed forward to perform CPR with the help of a security guard, but Han's injuries were too severe. He died shortly after being removed from the tracks. In the hours that followed, investigators reviewed station surveillance footage and a cell phone video showing Naeem arguing with Han before the shove. The next day, Naeem was arrested and confessed to pushing Han, though he claimed he did not realize an oncoming train was due. Nobody believed that story. Han, a Korean immigrant who lived in Queens with his wife and daughter, had been in Midtown to renew his passport. His only child later said it would have been great if someone had reached out to help him up, but instead, the inaction during those critical seconds sealed his fate. His legacy was reduced to one photo of his final seconds, which some random guy presumably sold for a few $100s. His family got nothing but grief and loss. Level 6. Per Yngve Olin, a.k.a. Dead. Per Yngve Olin first drew notice in underground metal circles as the singer for Morbid, a Swedish death/thrash band, before joining Norway's Mayhem in 1988 under the name Dead. His adopted name sprang from a violent incident in his childhood when bullies left him with a ruptured spleen that rendered him clinically dead for a time. From that moment, he carried with him an unshakable fixation on mortality and death. Dead was once known inside the scene as a quiet, withdrawn figure, but over time he began to collect dead birds, wear shirts printed with funeral notices, and sleep outdoors amid the trees rather than remain under a roof. Before every show, he would bury his stage clothes in earth, intent that they had to reek of decay when worn. But that wasn't enough for him. He kept a crow's carcass in a bag, breathing in its scent backstage to summon the smell of death. On stage, he severed his skin with shards of broken glass or a blade, deliberately injuring himself to get some blood on stage to mingle with the dark music and sell the tone to the audience. When you look into his lyrics, it starts to make sense. His lyrics for mayhem songs like Freezing Moon and Funeral Fog are just blunt confrontations with nothingness. He says that he's not alive in any conventional sense, as though he's stuck in some weird zone between death and consciousness. In fact, some mental health experts would say this lines up with Cotard syndrome, a rare delusional state in which sufferers are convinced they are already dead or devoid of internal organs. That brief touch with death in his childhood really left a mark on his psyche. In the spring of 1991, at age 22, he ended his life in the Oslo house he shared with bandmates. After cutting his wrists and throat, he used a shotgun to kill himself. Just as he would always have wanted, his body was later photographed by a bandmate, and the image became the infamous cover of a bootleg live album. The note he left behind reads simply, "Excuse all the blood." The case of Breck Bednar. Breck Bednar loved technology. He spent hours after school on his computer playing games like Call of Duty and Battlefield with his friends. In 2013, this passion connected him to Lewis Daines, an 18-year-old who ran a gaming server through TeamSpeak. Lewis presented himself as everything a teenager gaming enthusiast might aspire to become. He claimed to work for the U.S. government and boasted about his high-flying job in New York, complete with fictional FBI connections. He promised the boys in his gaming group that he was wealthy and could make them rich too through a computer software business. Now, the other boys in the group gradually saw through these fabrications and stopped interacting with him, but not Breck. He became increasingly isolated from his friends as Lewis systematically turned him against them. Lewis cultivated a friendship with Breck's mother, Lauren, convincing her that he was a positive influence while simultaneously working to separate Breck from the family. It worked. Breck's behavior began changing in ways that alarmed his mother. His personality shifted, his ideology transformed, and he started refusing to attend church with his family. Everything Breck said began with the phrase, "Lewis says, no matter the topic." Lauren took concrete steps to protect her son, limiting his access to electronics, installing parental controls, and explicitly forbidding him from using the same server as Lewis. When these measures failed, she contacted Surrey police on December 17, 2013, expressing concerns about online grooming and warned them that her son was in danger. The police took no action. On February 16, 2014, Breck told his father he was staying overnight with a friend near their home. Instead, he traveled 30 miles by taxi to meet Lewis at his flat in Essex. This was the first time they had met in person. The details of what happened in Lewis's flat aren't fully clear, but we know that some intimate activity occurred shortly before Lewis bound Breck's wrists and ankles and slashed his throat. But then Lewis took photographs of Breck's body and sent them to at least 2 people in their online gaming community. One friend later got a message from Lewis claiming that Breck had been feeling down and that an accident had occurred while trying to prevent self-harm. While police were telling Breck's father about his son's death, Breck's 12-year-old siblings were receiving text messages from friends asking about what had happened to their brother. They saw the photos. Initially, Daines maintained his story that Breck's death was accidental. He claimed the teenager had been depressed and had attacked him with a knife, leading to a struggle that ended tragically. But the evidence was against him. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. The family received a settlement from Surrey police, who agreed to implement procedural changes to better protect children. But even after his conviction, Lewis continued to torment Breck's family from prison. He sent disturbing messages to Breck's sister through social media, including threats about knowing where Breck was buried and promises to damage his tombstone. He also sent letters to Breck's mother, timing one to arrive when he knew the family would be gathering, just to remind them of what he did. Level 7. The shooting of Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor was asleep in her own home on the morning of March 13, 2020, when plainclothes officers from the Louisville Metro Police Department executed a no-knock warrant at her apartment door. Without announcing themselves loud enough to be heard, the officers forced entry just before 1 a.m. Breonna's boyfriend, believing intruders were breaking in, fired one warning shot that struck an officer in the leg. In response, officers unleashed a barrage of at least 32 rounds, hitting Breonna 6 times and ending her life, even though she was still in her bed. The warrant had been authorized as part of a narcotics investigation targeting a former tenant, but Breonna's residence was not linked directly to any illegal substance sales, and no contraband was recovered inside. The officers returned fire immediately after the shot, while another officer outside sprayed bullets into neighboring units, endangering others in adjacent homes. Body cameras were not activated by the officers who entered, leaving only peripheral footage from an arriving SWAT team to piece together what happened from the chaotic scene in front of them. This horrific and unlawful killing ignited protests across major U.S. cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, but also in London, Berlin, and Paris, where demonstrators held vigils and painted murals demanding accountability. Within weeks, Louisville City Council unanimously passed Breonna's law, banning such warrants under most circumstances. Investigators within the Department of Justice found a pattern of unlawful entries, excessive force, and civil rights violations within the LMPD, confirming that it was just a matter of time before something like this happened. Breonna was simply the unfortunate victim of their aggression. One officer faced wanton endangerment charges for firing into neighboring apartments, but the others evaded prosecution for Breonna Taylor's death. They had killed a totally unarmed, innocent woman and got away with it. Deaths of Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon. Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon arrived in Boquete, Panama on March 29, 2014 to volunteer and learn Spanish from the locals. On April 1st, at around 11 a.m., they set off along the El Pianista Trail near the Baru volcano, accompanied by a restaurant dog that later returned alone. As the sun set, neither woman reappeared, and on April 2nd, they missed a scheduled meeting with a local guide. Obviously, something had happened, but what would be discovered raised more questions than answers. Their parents arrived on April 6th and launched a 10-day search with Dutch detectives, canine units, and a $30,000 reward, but found no trace of the pair. 10 weeks later, on June 14th, a local woman handed in Froon's blue backpack found in the Culebra River near Alto Romero. Inside was 2 pairs of sunglasses, $88 in cash, Froon's insurance card, a water bottle, 2 bras, a camera, and both their phones in good condition. Those phones contained some of the only clues to the mystery that would ever be recovered. The phone showed that a distress call had been attempted by Chris at 4:39 p.m. on April 1st, dialing Panama's international emergency number, followed by a similar attempt from Lizanne's Galaxy S3 at 4:51 p.m. Neither call connected due to a lack of signal. Lizanne's phone died days later on April 4th, but Chris's iPhone intermittently powered on between April 5th and 11th, repeatedly entering incorrect pins before powering down for the last time at 11:56 a.m. on April 11th. The chances of Chris not knowing her PIN are very, very low. But Lizanne's Canon camera held the most uncomfortable evidence. Early trail photos from April 1st, then 90 near pitch-black flash shots between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. on April 8th, some depicting a riverbank, a backpack strap over a rock, and the back of Chris Kremers' head. The backpack clue being so pivotal, the team began searching the river again. Chris's denim shorts were recovered atop a rock opposite the backpack site. 2 months later, a pelvis and a boot containing a foot was found among at least 33 scattered bones along the bank. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to both women. Lizanne's bones retained some skin while Chris's appeared sun-bleached, a natural effect of prolonged exposure. A Panamanian forensic anthropologist noted no discernible scratches of any kind on the bones, neither of natural nor cultural origin. Essentially, nobody has any idea what happened. The fate of these two young hikers is just one giant question mark. James Bulger. On the 12th of February, 1993, two 10-year-old boys led a 2-year-old boy out of a busy shopping center in Bootle, Merseyside. His mother had let go of his hand for a few seconds to pay for some meat, and when she looked up, he was gone. CCTV footage of the boy walking with his captors became one of the most infamous images in British history. His captors, Robert Thompson and John Venables, took him on a 2.5-mile route through Liverpool, passing startled onlookers who saw the toddler with a bumped forehead crying and confused. Some spoke to the boys who claimed he was their brother or that they were escorting him to a police station. Nobody stopped them. Nobody even considered the possibility that they could be lying. Along the way, they kicked him, dropped him on his head, and threw blue modeling paint in one eye. Bricks, stones, and a heavy iron bar were used to beat him, inflicting dozens of wounds. When he finally lay on the embankment of a railway line, the boys arranged some rubber over his head and left him there, hoping the approaching train would conceal their crime. His small body was discovered 2 days later, on the 14th of February, on the tracks at Walton. Obviously, he was already dead. The investigation saw detectives poring over low-resolution CCTV, eventually uncovering that tragically infamous image. Now convinced they had found their culprits, the police released images of the two boys and immediately got some information. A woman recognized one as a kid bunking off from a local school and alerted the authorities. Both were arrested on the 20th of February and questioned for over 20 hours on tape, confessing to their actions but giving few details about motives. It seemed like there was no real reason for them to do this. They just did it. On the 24th of November 1993, at Preston Crown Court, a jury found them guilty of the boys' killing, making them the youngest convicted killers in modern British history. They were detained indefinitely with a minimum sentence of 8 years. Public outrage was fierce, with newspapers headlining "Freaks of Nature" and crowds demanding harsh punishment. But in June 2001, both Robert and John were released under new identities. Their current names or whereabouts are unknown, but very few people thought that the sentence was harsh enough for what they did. If you want to make more disturbing discoveries, why not check out this iceberg on the most disturbing things in each state?